So I was scrolling through finance content the other day, right? And I kept seeing all these videos with titles like, I retired at 32 with these 5 simple rules and how to build wealth from zero. And honestly, at first I was like, okay, let me take notes. But then I actually tried to apply any of it to my real life, and something just felt completely off. Today, I want to talk about what I think might be the biggest lie hiding inside basically all mainstream financial advice, and why nobody who actually needs to hear this stuff ever gets told the truth. Alright, so let me explain what I mean. There is this massive industry built around personal finance advice. YouTube channels, podcasts, books, blog posts, Instagram carousels, TikToks, and the advice kind of sounds the same everywhere you go. Track your expenses, cut out the daily coffee, set financial goals, create a budget, build an emergency fund, invest early. And look, none of that advice is technically wrong. Like, it is not incorrect information, but here is the thing that has been bugging me for a while now. And I only just started to piece it together. All of that advice assumes that the problem is your behavior. Like, somewhere along the way, the entire financial media industry landed on this idea that the reason you are broke is because you are doing something wrong. You are spending too much. You are not disciplined enough. You are not tracking correctly, you do not have the right system or the right mindset, and if you just fix those things, wealth would follow. And I want to be real with you. When I first started trying to learn about money, I completely bought into this. I downloaded budgeting apps. I started writing down every single thing I spent money on. I was genuinely trying. And for a second, it felt like I was doing something productive, like I was on the path. But then I sat down one night and actually looked at the numbers, and I realized that no amount of tracking was going to fix my actual problem, which was that the money coming in was not enough to cover the money going out. No spreadsheet was going to close that gap. Let me break this down in a way that actually made sense to me. Think about what it means to be starting from basically nothing. You have rent, or you're contributing to rent somewhere. You have food costs. You probably have some kind of transportation costs, whether that is a car payment, insurance, bus fare, whatever. Maybe you have a phone bill. If you are in the US, there is probably some kind of healthcare situation you are navigating. And those are just the basics. That is before we even talk about student debt or credit card debt or any of the other fun stuff that tends to accumulate when you are young and nobody ever taught you how any of this worked. Now, here's the thing about those basic expenses. They are not really optional. You cannot budget your way out of needing somewhere to live. You cannot skip eating. Transportation is often not negotiable if you need to get to work. So when someone tells you to cut your spending and invest the difference, that advice only actually works if there is a meaningful difference to begin with. And for a lot of us, especially at the start, there genuinely is not. I remember a specific moment that kind of crystallized this for me. I got my paycheck, and I was already mentally doing the math before it even landed. Okay, this much for my share of rent, this much for groceries, this for the phone bill, this for the bus pass, and by the time I got through all of that, I was looking at maybe $30 or $40 left over for the entire rest of the month. And I kept thinking about all the advice I had heard. The advice was like, okay, of that $30, you should be investing 15 of it. And I just sat there going, invest $15? That is my cushion if literally anything goes wrong this month. And that is not a mindset problem. That is a math problem. Now, I want to be fair here because I do not think everyone giving financial advice is being deliberately dishonest. I think a lot of it comes from a place of genuine good intentions. But there is this really sneaky thing that happens where people who figured out how to build wealth share the habits and routines they had while building it, and then present those habits as the cause. Like, I track my spending and now I am wealthy. Therefore, tracking your spending will make you wealthy. But that logic skips over the part where the person already had enough income that tracking actually revealed meaningful savings opportunities. When you are making a comfortable income, cutting back on unnecessary spending genuinely adds up. You cut a couple of subscriptions, you eat out a few less times a week, you cancel that gym membership you never use, and suddenly you have a couple $100s a month to put towards savings or investments. That is real. That math works. But when you are already cutting everything possible and the basics are still eating 90 or 100% of what comes in, no habit or mindset shift is going to conjure extra money out of nowhere. And this is where I think the real lie is hiding. Not that the habits are bad, but that the habits are being sold as the solution, when for a lot of people, the actual issue is on the income side, not the spending side. The financial media loves to frame this as a self-control problem or a knowledge problem because that makes for great content. It is much more satisfying to watch a video that says, here are 5 things you're doing wrong with money, versus a video that says, actually the system makes it structurally hard to save when you are at the bottom of the income ladder. Now, here is where I had to have a real conversation with myself, because I could take 2 paths with this realization. Path 1 is to just feel annoyed and defeated and use it as a reason to not even try. Like, oh, well, the system is rigged, so what is the point? And honestly, for a minute there, I kind of leaned toward that path. But then I started thinking about it differently. If the spending side of the equation is already pretty maxed out and the savings are slim to none because of it, then the thing I actually have some agency over is the income side. And that felt like a more honest framing than anything I had seen in a finance video before. Not, here's a spending habit that will make you rich, but rather the real lever you have access to early on is finding ways to grow what you bring in, even if it starts small. And I know that sounds like I just replaced one piece of generic advice with another, but there is actually a difference in how you approach it, because instead of looking at your budget and trying to squeeze blood from a stone, you start looking at what skills you have or could build that might earn more. Maybe that means picking up extra hours somewhere. Maybe it means learning something specific that makes you more valuable in the job you already have. Maybe it means starting something on the side, even tiny. The point is, the energy shifts from trying to shrink expenses that are already at their floor to trying to grow the ceiling. This connects to something I have been slowly understanding about how money actually works, which is that a lot of the rules of finance, the compound interest magic, the investing early thing, the emergency fund advice, all of that stuff is real and it does work. But it works much better once there is actually some margin in your financial life. Like, compound interest is incredible if you have something to compound. If you have almost nothing, you still need to understand it, but it is not the urgent first move. The urgent first move, at least for where I am right now, is closing the gap between income and expenses enough that the other stuff becomes possible, because you cannot invest consistently if an unexpected expense wipes out whatever you manage to save. You cannot build an emergency fund if there is no surplus after the basics are covered. You cannot start thinking long term if the short term is constantly on fire. So what does this actually mean for me going forward? A few things. First, I stopped feeling guilty about not having a fat investment account or a perfectly optimized budget. I am at the beginning of this. The rules change at different stages, and I think the beginning stage requires a different focus than what most financial content addresses. Second, I started thinking about income differently, not as a fixed thing that just is what it is, but as something I might actually be able to influence, even if slowly. What could I get better at? What do people need that I might be able to provide? Even thinking in those terms feels more useful than obsessing over which budget category I should cut. And third, I started paying more attention to the basics of how money actually works. Not because I think understanding inflation or interest rates is going to fix my finances overnight, but because the more clearly I can see how the system operates, the better I can spot when someone is selling me a version of it that does not actually apply to my situation. Because here's the thing, a lot of financial advice is technically true in some circumstances. It just does not always tell you which circumstances. And when you are starting from nearly zero, the circumstances matter a lot. The coffee advice works if you make enough that $5 a day is a meaningful percentage of discretionary income. The invest early advice works if there is any money left after the bills to invest. The emergency fund advice works if you have months where you come out even slightly ahead. None of this means the advice is useless. It just means you have to understand where you actually are before you can figure out what actually applies. I think the thing I keep coming back to is that financial advice is often designed for people who are already stable enough that tweaking habits will produce results, and that is genuinely helpful for those people. But for people who are starting from scratch, in the red, or just barely keeping their head above water, the advice can actually feel demoralizing because it frames the problem in a way that makes it seem like you are just not trying hard enough or thinking correctly, when really, sometimes the problem is just that the numbers do not work yet, and the first job is to change the numbers, not the mindset around them. I am still figuring all of this out. I do not have it solved. I do not have a savings account I am proud of or an investment portfolio I can talk about, but I think I at least have a more honest picture of why the standard advice was not landing for me and what I actually need to be focusing on right now. Next time, I want to dig into something that kind of follows on from this, because once you accept that income is the more urgent variable, there is this question of how money actually builds on itself over time and what the relationship is between time, money, and something called compound interest, which I genuinely did not understand until recently. And when I finally understood it, my reaction was this mix of excitement and frustration. Excitement because it is actually kind of amazing, and frustration because nobody explained it to me in a way that connected to where I am actually starting from. So that is what we're going to get into next. If you are in a similar situation to me, just starting out and trying to make sense of all of this, stick around. We are going to figure it out together.